when a janitor named Juniper Reed grabbed her mop handle and charged at 3 teenagers torturing a terrified child in a dark alley. She had no idea the boy crying in the rain was the son of Rogan Steele, the most dangerous Mafia boss in the city, or that saving him would cost her everything she thought she knew about survival, safety, and the brutal price of becoming visible to a man who doesn't forgive debts and doesn't let go of what belongs to him. What happened in the next 60 seconds, the moment those black SUVs arrived, the moment armed men surrounded her, the moment she locked eyes with a man whose single look could end lives, would either destroy her invisibility forever or give her the one thing she'd never dared to want, a family worth fighting for. But it started 8 minutes earlier, when Juniper still believed she could make it home without getting involved. Chemicals. That was the only thing Juniper Reed could smell anymore. Industrial strength bleach and ammonia, the kind that burned the back of your throat and made your eyes water even after you clocked out. She'd been scrubbing floors at the Riverside Industrial Facility for 12 hours straight, and her uniform, a faded blue jumpsuit with her name stitched in crooked letters, reeked of disinfectant and something worse: desperation. The kind that clung to people who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford decent groceries. All she wanted was to collapse into the narrow bed in her studio apartment and forget today existed. Maybe tomorrow her manager Todd wouldn't scream at her for taking a bathroom break. Maybe tomorrow her knees wouldn't ache from kneeling on concrete. Maybe tomorrow she'd stop feeling invisible, but probably not. The service alley behind the industrial park reeked of exhaust fumes, rotting garbage, and broken neon signs that flickered with electrical seizures. She'd taken this route 1,000 times, a shortcut between the facility and the bus stop that saved her 10 minutes and 2 blocks of walking. Smart people in this city knew the rules. Keep your head down, mind your business, get home alive. Juniper had made those rules her religion. But tonight, something was different. Laughter echoed off the brick walls. Not the good kind, the kind that celebrated joy or friendship or anything remotely human. This was sharp and cruel, the sound of people enjoying someone else's pain, the kind that made your skin crawl and your stomach clench, because you knew, instinctively, that something terrible was happening just out of sight. I should have kept walking, Juniper thought, her hand tightening on the handle of her industrial cleaning cart. Smart people didn't investigate dangerous sounds in dark alleys. Smart people survived by being selfish. She'd never been accused of being particularly smart. If you've ever felt invisible, been told you take up too much space, or had someone make you feel like you're too much or not enough, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now and comment where you're watching from. We're building a family of people who refuse to shrink anymore. The alley opened into a wider space where the loading docks created shadows deep enough to hide bodies. 3 teenage boys, no, young men, maybe 17 or 18, had surrounded someone smaller. Their phones were held high, recording, the blue glow from their screens illuminating the scene like some twisted stage production. They wore designer sneakers and jackets that probably cost more than Juniper's monthly rent. Rich kids slumming it in the industrial district, looking for entertainment, and they'd found it. The victim was a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing what had probably been an expensive private school uniform before it got soaked through and streaked with mud. Dark gray blazer, crisp white shirt, striped tie, all of it ruined. His dark curly hair was plastered to his forehead, and his face was streaked with tears and grime. He couldn't explain why, but danger was closing in. The kid was crying. Not the loud, wailing kind that brought adults running, but the silent, hiccuping sobs that came from pure terror. The kind that said he'd already screamed for help and learned that no one was coming. "Come on, rich boy," one of the teenagers jeered, shoving the child toward another. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the build of someone who played varsity sports and knew he could intimidate through size alone. "Where's your daddy's money now? Can't buy your way out of this one, can you?" The child, Ozzy, though Juniper didn't know his name yet, stumbled, his small hands reaching out to break his fall. He hit the wet pavement hard, his palms scraping across concrete, and fresh tears streamed down his face. His mouth opened in a silent gasp of pain. Juniper's cleaning cart hit the pavement before she'd consciously decided to move. "Hey!" Her voice came out harder than she'd intended, years of dealing with handsy customers and abusive managers packed into that single syllable. "Back the hell away from him." That moment, everything in the room changed. The 3 boys turned and she got her first good look at them. 17, maybe 18, wearing clothes that screamed money and privilege. One had a varsity jacket with Street Augustine Preparatory embroidered across the back. Another had the kind of watch that cost more than her car before it was repossessed. The third, the tall one who'd shoved Ozzy, had cold eyes that said he'd never faced consequences in his entire privileged life. "This doesn't concern you, lady," the tall one said, but his voice wavered. Good. He should be scared. Juniper pulled out her phone, angling it at them with deliberate slowness. Really? Because it looks like you're assaulting a child and posting it online for your little social media circus. That's funny, because I can see your faces really clearly right now. She zoomed in on the varsity jacket. And look at that, your friend there has a name stitched on his jacket. Marcus Chen, Street Augustine Preparatory. How helpful. The kid with the jacket, Marcus, according to the embroidery, went pale. We were just messing around. Messing around? Juniper moved between them and the crying child, her body a physical barrier. She wasn't tall, wasn't imposing, but something in her posture, the set of her shoulders, the way she planted her feet made them hesitate. You were terrorizing someone half your size and filming it for entertainment. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to delete those videos. You're going to give me your names, and then you're going to disappear before I decide whether involving the cops is worth my time. You can't, the third boy started. I already took screenshots of your faces in that jacket, Juniper lied smoothly. They're uploading to my cloud right now, so you can either cooperate, or tomorrow morning your school, your parents, and every college you're applying to gets to see what kind of people you really are. Your choice. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. The reality of consequences hit them all at once. They scrambled to delete videos, stammering out names she immediately memorized. Marcus Chen, Derek Walsh, Justin Carlisle, then practically ran from the alley, their expensive sneakers splashing through puddles. One of them dropped his phone in his panic, and Juniper kicked it deeper into the shadows. Good riddance. She turned to the child, who had curled into himself against the brick wall, shaking so hard she could hear his teeth chattering. Rain, when had it started raining, had plastered his dark curly hair to his forehead, and his eyes, when they met hers, were huge and terrified, and a striking shade of amber that seemed almost unnatural in the dim light. Hey, Juniper said softly, crouching down to his level but keeping some distance. She'd learned this the hard way. Cornered animals bit, and traumatized kids weren't much different. They're gone. You're safe now. He didn't respond, just stared at her like he couldn't quite process that the threat had vanished. His breathing was coming too fast, each inhale sharp and shallow. Panic attack territory. Juniper had seen this before her younger sister, before the foster system separated them. Used to have panic attacks that left her gasping and disoriented. Without thinking about how expensive his uniform probably was compared to her bank account, Juniper shrugged off her worn denim jacket and draped it around his small shoulders. It was too big, hanging past his hands, but he clutched it like a lifeline. Then she did something that probably broke every stranger danger rule in the book. She sat down on the wet, cold pavement beside him, not hovering, not demanding anything, just present. You don't have to talk, she told him quietly, her voice steady and low. You don't have to do anything. Just breathe with me, okay? In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. She demonstrated, exaggerating her breathing so he could follow. He watched her, his chest still heaving, but slowly, incrementally, he began to match her rhythm. Minutes passed. The rain kept falling, soaking through her jumpsuit, but Juniper didn't move. She started humming without really thinking about it, an old lullaby her mother used to sing before the cancer took her voice. She'd hummed it to her sister in those group home nights when neither of them could sleep. The child's breathing steadied. His shaking began to subside. He pulled her jacket tighter around himself, and something in his posture shifted from pure panic to exhaustion. Juniper? A voice cut through the sound of rain. Her coworker, Maria, appeared at the alley entrance, her dark hair darkening further under the downpour. What the hell are you doing out here? Todd's been screaming about the cart. She stopped, taking in the scene. Juniper soaked and sitting in a puddle, the child wrapped in her jacket, still trembling. Blood on the pavement where he'd scraped his hands. Oh my God, is he okay? Some kids were bullying him, Juniper said, her voice flat. Filming it. I handled it. Maria knew that tone. It meant Juniper had done something reckless, and probably right. She moved closer, her maternal instincts kicking in. She had 3 kids at home. Should we call someone? Police? His parents? Before Juniper could answer, the sound of engines roared into the alley. He realized he wasn't alone, someone else had arrived. 3 black SUVs, the kind with windows tinted so dark they looked like they absorbed light, screeched to a halt at the alley entrance, blocking any exit. Their headlights flooded the space with harsh white light that made Juniper squint. Juniper, Maria whispered urgently, grabbing her arm. We need to go, now. But it was too late for that. Doors flew open and men poured out. 6, 7, maybe more. They wore dark suits that somehow remained crisp despite the weather, and every single one of them moved with the fluid, coordinated purpose of people trained for violence. They fanned out, securing the perimeter like they'd done this 1,000 times before. And they were all armed. Juniper could see the bulges under their jackets, the way their hands hovered near concealed weapons. From here on, the rules of the game changed. One of them, built like a linebacker with a scar running down his jaw and cold gray eyes, rushed forward. His face transformed from professional menace to genuine relief when he saw the child. "Thank God," he breathed, dropping to one knee. "Ozzy, we found you." Ozzy, so that was his name. The last man to emerge from the lead SUV didn't rush. He didn't need to. The others parted for him automatically. An unconscious acknowledgement of hierarchy that spoke volumes about power and fear. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned, never being denied, never having to explain himself to anyone. He was tall, maybe 6'2" or 6'3", with the kind of build that came from discipline rather than vanity. Broad shoulders, lean waist, the posture of someone who'd been trained in combat. His hair was dark and perfectly styled despite the rain, swept back from a face that belonged on Roman coins. All sharp angles, strong jaw, aristocratic features. His suit was a deep burgundy that looked black in the shadows. Perfectly tailored, probably worth more than every piece of clothing Juniper had ever owned combined. In that moment, the entire balance of power flipped. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. Dark, almost black, and currently locked onto her with an intensity that made breathing difficult. Those eyes swept over her with predatory precision, cataloging every detail. Her soaked uniform, her position on the ground beside his son, the protective way she'd angled herself between the child and potential threats. The mud on her hands, the exhaustion etched into her face. His expression was unreadable, dangerous, beautiful in the way that storms were beautiful, powerful, and destructive, and impossible to look away from. "Ozzy," he said, and his voice carried the kind of authority that made powerful men nervous. It was low, controlled, edged with something sharp. "Come here." The boy Ozzy scrambled up and ran to him. The man caught him, lifting him easily despite the mud and rain, holding him close in a way that softened every harsh line of his face. For a moment, he looked almost human. "Papa, she helped me," Ozzy managed, his voice rough from crying and panic. His small hands clutched his father's jacket. The boys they were. "I know." "Shh." The man Papa, Rogan Steele, though Juniper didn't know his name yet, pressed his lips to Ozzy's wet hair. "I know, you're safe now." Then those dark eyes found Juniper again. What he didn't know was that someone was watching, and everything in her world was about to change. Rogan Steele didn't speak for what felt like an eternity. He just stood there in the rain, holding his son against his chest, his dark eyes fixed on Juniper with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the brick wall behind her. The armed men had formed a perimeter around them, their hands still hovering near their weapons, and Maria had gone completely silent beside her, the kind of silence that came from recognizing danger on an instinctual level. Juniper pushed herself to her feet, her knees protesting after sitting on cold concrete. She was acutely aware of how she must look. Soaked uniform reeking of bleach, hair plastered to her face, mud streaked across her jumpsuit. Standing in front of this man, whoever he was, felt like standing in front of a judge who'd already delivered a verdict she couldn't hear yet. "You're hurt," Rogan said finally, his gaze dropping to Ozzy's scraped palms. His voice was low and controlled, but something dangerous rippled beneath the surface. He turned to the scarred man who'd arrived first. "Marcus, get the medic." His next decision would decide whether he lived or died. Marcus moved immediately, speaking into an earpiece with the efficiency of military precision. Within seconds, a woman appeared from one of the SUVs carrying a medical kit that looked far too sophisticated for simple scrapes. "Papa, I'm okay," Ozzy whispered, but his small hands were still trembling. "You're not okay." Rogan's jaw tightened, and for the first time, Juniper saw the rage simmering beneath his controlled exterior. "You were terrified. You were hurt. That's not okay." He finally looked at Juniper again, and she felt the weight of his assessment like a physical thing. "You stopped them." It wasn't a question, but Juniper nodded anyway. They were filming him, hurting him. "I couldn't just..." She stopped, suddenly aware of how stupid it sounded. Couldn't just what? Walk away? Mind her own business like every survival instinct screamed at her to do? "What's your name?" Rogan asked. "Juniper Reed." "Where do you work?" "Juniper Reed?" She gestured vaguely toward the industrial facility looming behind them. "Riverside Industrial. I'm a janitor. I was heading home when I heard..." "A janitor," Rogan repeated. and something shifted in his expression. Not pity exactly, but recognition, like he was recalculating something important. "You work for Todd Mercer." Juniper's stomach dropped. "How do you—" There was one detail everyone missed. "I know everything about everyone in this city." His voice was matter-of-fact, not boastful, just stating truth. Todd Mercer, 52 years old. 3 complaints of workplace harassment buried by HR. 2 DUIs. A gambling problem he thinks no one knows about. Rogan's eyes never left hers. "He screams at you, doesn't he? In front of the other employees? Makes you work double shifts without overtime pay. Threatens to fire you if you complain." Juniper felt Maria's sharp intake of breath beside her, but she couldn't look away from Rogan. That's not." "Don't lie to me," Rogan said quietly. "I can see it in the way you hold yourself. Like you're trying to take up less space. Like you've learned that making yourself small is the only way to survive." He shifted Ozzy's weight in his arms, and his son buried his face against his shoulder. "You saved my son tonight, and I don't forget debts." "I don't want anything," Juniper said quickly. "I just wanted to help." "Marcus," Rogan interrupted, his eyes still locked on hers. "Find out everything about Juniper Reed. Where she lives, what she owes, who she knows. I want a complete file by morning." "Yes, sir." "If you've ever had to choose between survival and dignity, if you've ever hidden who you really are just to keep food on the table, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and join us. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Let's stand together for everyone who's been forced to choose between living and being seen." "Wait," Juniper started, but Rogan was already moving, carrying Ozzy toward the lead SUV. The medic followed, and the other armed men began retreating to their vehicles with the same coordinated precision they'd arrived with. Rogan paused at the SUV door and looked back at her one last time. In the harsh headlights, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "Go home, Juniper Reed. Get some rest. Tomorrow things are going to change for you." "What does that mean?" she called out. But he was already inside the SUV, the door closing with a heavy final sound. This was only the beginning of a much bigger war. The 3 vehicles pulled away, their engines roaring through the rain, and then the alley was empty except for Juniper, Maria, and the lingering sense that she'd just stepped into something far bigger and more dangerous than she understood. "Juniper," Maria whispered, her voice shaking. "Do you know who that was?" "No. That was Rogan Steele." Maria grabbed her arm hard enough to hurt. "Rogan Steele. He owns half this city. Construction, real estate, shipping, everything. And everyone knows everyone that he's connected. Mafia. Organized crime. Whatever you want to call it." She pulled Juniper toward the street, away from the alley. "You just saved the son of the most dangerous man in the city." Juniper's legs felt weak. "I didn't know." "It doesn't matter what you knew." Maria was practically dragging her now. "What matters is that he saw you. And when men like Rogan Steele see you, your life stops being your own." They reached the bus stop, and Juniper sank onto the bench, her entire body shaking not from cold, but from the delayed shock of what had just happened. She'd intervened in a street fight and somehow ended up on the radar of a Mafia boss. A man who knew about Todd, about her job, about everything. "Tomorrow, things are going to change for you." She didn't know if that was a promise or a threat. Maria sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Whatever happens next, I've got your back, okay? We'll figure it out together." But as the bus pulled up and Juniper climbed aboard, still soaked and shivering, she had the sinking feeling that figuring it out wasn't going to be an option. Rogan Steele had already decided what happened next, and men like him didn't ask for permission. Juniper arrived at work the next morning, expecting everything to be normal. Todd would scream about yesterday's abandoned cleaning cart. She'd apologize and take the abuse because that's what survival looked like. She'd scrub floors until her hands ached and go home to her studio apartment and try to forget about dark eyes and 3 black SUVs and a little boy named Ozzy. Instead, she found chaos. The parking lot was full of expensive cars she'd never seen before. Men in suits, not the security kind, but the lawyer kind, were walking through the facility with clipboards and tablets, taking notes and photographs. And standing in the middle of the main floor, looking more terrified than Juniper had ever seen him, was Todd. "What's going on?" she asked Maria, who was standing near the supply closet with wide eyes. "The facility was sold," Maria whispered. "This morning. Some corporation bought the whole building, the equipment, everything. They showed up an hour ago with paperwork and started doing inventory." Juniper's stomach clenched. "Sold to who?" "Steel Industries." But what he discovered next changed everything. The name hit her like a physical blow. She looked around the facility with new eyes, seeing it differently now. This wasn't a coincidence. This was Rogan Steele making good on whatever promise or threat he'd made last night. Juniper Reed? One of the suited men approached her, his expression professionally neutral. I'm David Chen, legal counsel for Steele Industries. Mr. Steele would like to see you in the executive office. Immediately. We don't have an executive office. We do now. David gestured toward the stairs that led to what used to be unused storage space. Please follow me. Juniper glanced at Maria, who mouthed, "Be careful," and then followed David up the stairs. The storage space had been transformed overnight, literally overnight, into a proper office. New furniture, new carpet, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the facility floor. And sitting behind a massive desk, looking completely at home in this hastily constructed seat of power, was Rogan Steele. He'd traded last night's rain-soaked suit for a charcoal gray three-piece that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and those dangerous eyes tracked her movement as she entered the room. He didn't stand, didn't smile, just watched her with the same intensity that had made her breath catch in the alley. "Close the door," he said to David, who obeyed immediately and left them alone. For the first time, he wasn't in control. Juniper stood in the middle of the office, acutely aware of her faded uniform and the smell of industrial cleaner that never quite left her skin. "You bought the facility." "I did." "Why?" "Because you saved my son, and you work in a place where you're treated like you're disposable." Rogan leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Todd Mercer has been fired. He'll find his severance package more than generous, provided he signs an NDA and never contacts you again. The other employees will receive raises and better benefits. But you," his eyes narrowed slightly, "you're not staying here." "What?" "I'm offering you a job," Rogan said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Personal assistant and full-time companion to my son. You'll live in my home, have your own suite, a salary of $200,000 a year plus benefits. Your job is simple. Be there for Ozzy. Keep him safe. Help him heal from last night's trauma." Juniper felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. 200,000, that's insane. That's non-negotiable. Rogan stood, moving around the desk with the fluid grace of a predator. He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Ozzy hasn't spoken more than 3 words at a time in 6 months. Not since his mother died. Last night, after you left, he talked for an hour straight about the woman who saved him. About how you sat with him in the rain and taught him to breathe. About how you didn't treat him like he was broken. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for family. I'm sorry about his mother," Juniper said quietly, and meant it. "So am I." Something dark crossed Rogan's face, but her death left him vulnerable, scared, and last night proved that my enemies will use that vulnerability against me. Having you close, having someone he trusts, someone who's proven they'll protect him without hesitation, that's not charity, Juniper. That's strategy. I'm not qualified to be anyone's assistant. You're qualified to be what my son needs. Rogan's voice was firm, brooking no argument. And that's all that matters. You'll have security, a driver, access to anything you need. I'll pay off your debts, yes. I know about those too and set up an account for your future. All you have to do is say yes. Juniper's mind was reeling. This was insane. This was too much. Men like Rogan Steele didn't just hand out 6-figure salaries to janitors who happened to be in the right place at the right time. There had to be a catch. "What if I say no?" she asked, even though some part of her already knew the answer. Rogan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You won't. That sounds like a threat. It's a statement of fact." He moved closer, and Juniper's back hit the wall without her realizing she'd been retreating. He didn't touch her, but his presence was overwhelming heat and danger and something else she couldn't name. "You spent 12 hours yesterday scrubbing floors for a man who screams at you. You live in a studio apartment with a broken heater and a landlord who's threatened to evict you twice. You're one emergency away from losing everything." His voice dropped to something almost gentle. "I'm offering you safety, Juniper. Security, a chance to stop being invisible. Why do I get the feeling that working for you is more dangerous than anything I'm running from?" "Because you're smart," Rogan said. "Smarter than you give yourself credit for. Yes, my world is dangerous. Yes, there are risks, but I protect what's mine. And the moment you say yes, you become mine to protect." This single decision gave him the upper hand again. The possessiveness in his voice should have scared her. Maybe it did. But there was something else underneath it, something raw and honest that made her think this wasn't just about strategy or debt or even Ozzy's well-being. This was about a man who'd almost lost his son and was doing everything in his power to make sure it never happened again. "I need time to think," Juniper said. "You have until noon." Rogan stepped back, giving her space to breathe. "David will handle the logistics if you accept. If you refuse," he shrugged, "you can keep working here under the new management. I won't force you, but Ozzy will be disappointed. He's been asking for you since dawn." That hit harder than any threat could have. The image of that small, terrified boy asking for her, trusting her, made something in her chest crack open. "Noon," she repeated. "Noon," Rogan confirmed. Juniper left the office on shaking legs, her mind spinning with impossible choices and dangerous possibilities. Maria caught her at the bottom of the stairs, questions written all over her face, but Juniper couldn't find words to explain what had just happened. She had 4 hours to decide if she was brave enough or stupid enough to step into Rogan Steele's world. And deep down, she already knew what her answer would be. The Steele mansion sat on 20 acres of manicured grounds behind gates that looked like they could stop a tank. Juniper sat in the back of the black SUV Marcus driving, silent and professional, and watched the estate grow larger through the tinted windows. It looked like something out of a movie. Gray stone facade, wings extending in both directions, gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. This was going to be her home. The thought made her want to laugh and cry in equal measure. "Mr. Steele is in meetings until 6, Marcus said as they pulled up to the main entrance. "Mrs. Castellanos will get you settled. She runs the household staff." A woman appeared at the top of the stone steps before Juniper could respond. Late 50s, gray hair pulled into an elegant bun, wearing a crisp black dress that somehow managed to look both professional and warm. Her face broke into a genuine smile as Juniper climbed out of the SUV. "You must be Juniper," she said, her accent faintly Spanish. "I'm Elena Castellanos. Welcome home." Home. The word felt foreign in Juniper's mouth, but Elena said it like she meant it. This is all..." Juniper gestured helplessly at the mansion, the grounds, the sheer impossible scale of everything. "I was scrubbing floors yesterday, and today you're family," Elena said simply, as if it were that easy. She linked her arm through Juniper's and guided her up the steps. "Mr. Steele has been very clear about your position here. You're not staff. You're Ozzy's companion and Mr. Steele's personal assistant. That means you have authority second only to Mr. Steele himself." He knew something that no one else in the building did. Juniper's head was spinning. "I don't know how to be anyone's assistant." "You know how to be kind," Elena said. "You know how to be brave. That's all Ozzy needs. The rest will teach you." The interior of the mansion was just as overwhelming as the exterior. Marble floors, artwork that probably belonged in museums, a staircase that curved up to the second floor like something out of a fairy tale. But Elena didn't give her time to gawk. She led Juniper through hallways and rooms, pointing out the kitchen, the library, the sitting rooms, until they reached a wing that felt somehow separate from the rest of the house. "This is the family wing," Elena explained. "Mr. Steele's suite is at the end of the hall. Ozzy's room is here." She pointed to a door covered in hand-drawn pictures and crayon art. "And this is yours." She opened a door, and Juniper stepped into a space 3 times the size of her studio apartment. A massive bed with a cream-colored duvet, a sitting area with a couch and chair, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens, a door that led to what appeared to be a walk-in closet, and another that revealed a bathroom with a tub deep enough to swim in. "This can't be right," Juniper whispered. "Mr. Steele was very specific about your accommodations," Elena said. "He wanted you comfortable, safe. This wing has enhanced security. Only family and senior staff have access. You'll find clothes in the closet, toiletries in the bathroom. If you need anything else, just ask." Juniper walked to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. She still wore her cleaning uniform, still smelled like bleach, but the woman staring back at her was about to become someone else entirely. "Where's Ozzy?" she asked quietly. "In his room. He's been waiting for you." Elena's expression softened. "He hasn't been this excited about anything since his mother passed." "You're good for him, Juniper. Don't doubt that." But this wasn't even the most shocking part. After Elena left, Juniper stood in her new room for a long moment, trying to process the surreal shift her life had taken in less than 24 hours. Then she walked down the hall and knocked on the door covered in crayon art. "Come in," a small voice called. Ozzy's room was exactly what she'd expect for an 8-year-old boy. Toys scattered across the floor, books stacked on every surface, a bed shaped like a race car. But what caught her attention was Ozzy himself, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her denim jacket, the one she'd given him in the alley, folded carefully in his lap. "You kept it," Juniper said softly. Ozzy looked up, and his entire face transformed. "You came. Papa said you would. But I thought maybe you didn't want to." "Hey," Juniper sat down on the floor beside him, keeping that same careful distance she'd maintained in the alley. "I promised I'd keep you safe, remember? That means being here. Papa fired your mean boss," Ozzy said matter-of-factly, "and he bought your building. And he said you're going to live with us now and be my friend." He looked at her with those enormous amber eyes, so much hope contained in such a small frame. "Is that true?" "It's true," Juniper confirmed, and watched his whole body relax. "I was scared you were just a dream," Ozzy admitted. "Sometimes I have dreams where Mama comes back, but then I wake up and she's still gone. I thought maybe you were like that." Juniper's chest tightened. "I'm real, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise?" She thought about Rogan's offer, the contract she'd signed, the impossibility of this entire situation. But looking at this small, wounded boy who'd somehow decided she was safe, she knew there was only one answer. "I promise." This choice would define the rest of his life. Ozzy launched himself at her, wrapping his arms around her neck in a hug that knocked the breath from her lungs. He smelled like expensive soap, and childhood, that indefinable scent of innocence that hadn't been completely destroyed yet. Juniper hugged him back, feeling something fundamental shift inside her chest. She'd spent years keeping her head down, avoiding connections, surviving by being invisible. But this boy saw her, needed her, and somehow, that mattered more than safety or sense or any of the logical reasons she should have run from this situation. "Want to show me your toys?" Juniper asked when Ozzy finally pulled back. His face lit up like she'd offered him the world. For the next 2 hours, Ozzy gave her a comprehensive tour of every toy, book, and treasure in his room. He talked more than she'd thought possible for a child who reportedly hadn't spoken in months, his words tumbling over themselves in his eagerness to share everything with her. He showed her the racetrack his father had built, the books his mother used to read, the drawings he'd made of their family. In every drawing, there were 3 figures: a tall man, a small boy, and now hastily added in fresh crayon a woman with dark hair and a blue jacket. "That's you," Ozzy said proudly. "That's our family now." Juniper traced the crayon lines with her finger, emotion clogging her throat. She'd spent so long without family, without belonging, that seeing herself included in this small, broken, dangerous family felt like being handed something precious and terrifying all at once. "It's perfect," she managed. When Elena came to collect Ozzy for dinner, he insisted Juniper come too. They ate in a smaller dining room, not the formal one, Elena explained. But the family one and Ozzy chattered nonstop about everything they'd discussed. Elena listened with the patient attention of someone who genuinely cared, and Juniper felt herself relaxing despite the strangeness of it all. Rogan didn't join them. "Still in meetings," Elena said. But Juniper felt his presence in every corner of this house, in every decision that had led to her sitting at this table with his son. After dinner, Juniper helped Elena get Ozzy ready for bed. She read him 3 stories, taught him another breathing technique for when the nightmares came, and promised she'd be right down the hall if he needed her. "Juniper?" Ozzy said sleepily as she reached his door. "Yeah? I'm glad you saved me." "Me too, sweetheart." She closed his door gently and stood in the hallway, exhausted and overwhelmed and strangely content. Her old life, the studio apartment, the abusive boss, the constant fear of eviction felt like it belonged to someone else. In one impulsive moment of courage, she'd traded invisibility for this. A mansion, a traumatized boy who needed her, and a dangerous man who'd rearranged his world to keep them both. He should have walked away, but then he saw it. "He trusts you." Rogan's voice came from behind her, low and unexpected. Juniper turned to find him leaning against the wall, still in his suit but with his tie loosened and the top button of his shirt undone. He looked tired, not physically, but emotionally, like he'd been carrying weight too heavy for anyone to bear alone. "He's a good kid," Juniper said. "He's a traumatized kid who finally found someone who makes him feel safe." Rogan pushed off the wall and moved closer. "Thank you for coming, for staying. I know this isn't what you expected from your life." "I didn't expect any of this," Juniper admitted. "Yesterday I was a janitor. Today I'm..." She gestured at the mansion around them. "I don't even know what I am." "You're essential," Rogan said simply, to him. And he stopped, something shifting in his expression. "To me." The weight of those words hung between them, heavy with implications Juniper wasn't ready to examine. She was acutely aware of how close he was standing, the way he looked at her like she was something rare and valuable. "I should get some rest," she said, her voice shakier than she'd like. Of course. Rogan stepped back, giving her space. If you need anything, anything at all, my room is at the end of the hall. Don't hesitate. Juniper nodded and retreated to her suite, closing the door and leaning against it with her heart hammering. She'd made her choice. She'd stepped into Rogan Steele's world, and tomorrow, she'd start learning exactly what that meant. But tonight, she'd kept a promise to a small boy who needed someone to choose him, and that felt like enough. Juniper had been living in the Steele mansion for 3 weeks when she witnessed exactly who Rogan Steele really was. The first 2 weeks had been an adjustment period, learning the house's rhythms, Ozzy's routines, the careful dance of living in a world that operated by rules she didn't fully understand. Elena had been patient, teaching her which rooms were public and which were private, which staff members she could trust and which ones worked for Rogan in capacities she shouldn't ask about. Ozzy had bloomed under her attention, his nightmares decreasing, his laughter increasing, his desperate need for her presence slowly evolving into comfortable trust. And Rogan had been carefully, almost ruthlessly appropriate, professional, distant enough to maintain boundaries but present enough that Juniper was always aware of him. The way he watched her with Ozzy, the way his whole body relaxed when she entered a room, the way he'd sometimes pause in doorways just to observe them together. But there was one thing he didn't know about his closest ally. It was Elena who'd warned her, casually, over morning coffee. Mr. Steele has a meeting in the East Study today. Perhaps take Ozzy to the gardens instead of the library. The careful phrasing had told Juniper everything. Stay away from the East Study. Don't see what happens there. Don't ask questions. So naturally, when Ozzy fell asleep during their afternoon reading time, Juniper found herself walking toward the East Wing. Not because she was trying to spy, but because she'd heard raised voices through the thick walls, and some instinct she didn't want to examine made her need to understand the man who'd given her this life. The study door was cracked open, whether by accident or arrogance. She didn't know. Through the gap, she could see Rogan standing behind his desk, his posture rigid with controlled rage. Marcus stood to his left, silent and watchful, and kneeling on the floor in front of them was a man maybe 40, wearing an expensive suit now soaked with sweat and what looked like blood from a split lip. I want to be very clear, Anthony, Rogan said, his voice calm in a way that made Juniper's skin crawl. You had one job: run the waterfront warehouse, maintain inventory, keep your mouth shut. Simple tasks that even someone of your limited intelligence should have been able to handle. Mr. Steele, I swear I didn't. You didn't what? Rogan moved around the desk with predatory grace. You didn't steal 3 shipments? You didn't sell them to my competitors? You didn't think I'd notice $50,000 disappearing from my operation? Everyone thought the deal went smoothly, but they were wrong. The man Anthony was shaking so hard Juniper could see it from across the room. I needed the money, my daughter's medical bills. So you stole from me. Rogan crouched in front of him, and even from her hidden position, Juniper could see the cold fury in his eyes. You looked at my kindness, my willingness to employ you despite your previous failures, and you decided I was weak enough to steal from. No, sir, Here's what's going to happen. Rogan interrupted, his voice dropping to something deadly quiet. You're going to return every penny. You're going to give me the names of everyone you sold to, and then you're going to leave this city and never come back. Because if I see you again, Anthony, if I even hear your name in connection with my business, I won't be this merciful. Merciful? Anthony's voice cracked. Rogan stood, towering over the kneeling man. You're breathing, aren't you? That's more mercy than you deserve. Marcus will escort you to the bank. You have 2 hours to arrange the transfer. If you run, he paused, letting the threat hang unfinished. Well, let's hope you're smarter than that. Marcus hauled Anthony to his feet and dragged him toward the door. Juniper barely had time to step back into the shadows before they passed. Anthony's face a mask of terror. She should have left, should have returned to Ozzy and pretended she'd never witnessed this. But her feet wouldn't move, and when Rogan's voice called out, "You can come in now, Juniper," she realized he'd known she was there the entire time. Someone in the room was lying, but who? Juniper stepped into the study, her heart hammering. Rogan stood by his desk, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter. He didn't look at her as he spoke. Elena warned you to stay away. She did. But you came anyway. He finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Curious or concerned? Both, Juniper admitted. There was no point in lying. That man said he needed money for his daughter's medical bills. That man stole from me, Rogan corrected, and then lied about why. His daughter doesn't exist. He has a gambling debt, and thought I was the easier target than his loan shark. He took a sip of his drink. Are you going to tell me I was too harsh? That I should have given him another chance? I don't know, Juniper said honestly. I don't know your world well enough to judge. But you want to judge. It wasn't a question. Rogan moved closer, and Juniper forced herself not to retreat. You want to believe I'm better than this, that the man who saved you from your abusive boss is somehow different from the man who just threatened someone's life. Are you? The words came out harder than she'd intended. Different? Rogan laughed, but there was no humor in it. No. I'm exactly what you saw in there. I run a business that operates in gray areas. I make decisions that keep my people safe and my enemies afraid. And sometimes, he stopped inches from her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion etched into his face. Sometimes I have to be the monster everyone thinks I am. Are you Team Juniper and Rogan? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. This story is just getting started. That man was terrified. That man was a thief. Rogan's voice hardened. In my world, mercy is a weakness that gets you killed. Compassion is a liability. The only reason Anthony is still alive is because he hasn't actually cost me anything I can't recover. What about the people who can't pay you back? Juniper challenged, her fear giving way to something like anger. What happens to them? That depends. Rogan set down his drink and cupped her face with one hand, his touch surprisingly gentle despite the conversation. On whether they're worth more to me alive than dead. On whether they're useful. On whether someone I care about would be hurt by their absence. And suddenly, he realized he was being played. The implication was clear. She was that someone. Ozzy was that someone. Their presence in his life had shifted his calculations in ways that probably made him vulnerable. I don't like this, Juniper said quietly. I don't like what you do. How you do it. I know. Rogan's thumb brushed her cheek, and she hated how her breath caught at the simple contact. But you're still here. You haven't run. You haven't taken Ozzy and demanded I let you go. Why? Because Ozzy needed her. Because this mansion felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived. Because Rogan Steele, for all his violence and moral ambiguity, had given her safety and purpose, and something that felt dangerously close to belonging. I don't know, she lied. You do. Rogan's voice was soft now, almost gentle. You know exactly why you're still here. You're just not ready to admit it yet. He released her and stepped back, breaking the spell of proximity. I won't lie to you about what I am, Juniper. I won't pretend to be better than I am just to make you comfortable. This is my world, complicated, violent, morally gray. And you're part of it now. So you have a choice. Accept it, or leave. You said I was essential, Juniper reminded him. That Ozzy needs me. He does. Rogan's expression was unreadable. But I won't keep you prisoner. If you want to go, I'll make sure you have everything you need to start over somewhere safe. No strings attached. It should have been an easy choice. Walk away from the violence, the danger, the moral compromises. Return to invisibility and safety. But Juniper thought about Ozzy's laughter, Elena's kindness, the way this house had become home. She thought about Rogan's careful distance, his fierce protection, the way he'd burned down her old life to give her something better. I'm not leaving, she said finally. Even knowing what I am? Especially knowing what you are. Juniper moved closer, surprising herself with her boldness. You're a monster, Rogan, but you're a monster who saved me. Who gave your son someone to heal with? Who threatens thieves but makes sure I have everything I could possibly need? So yes, I see what you are, and I'm still here. He didn't want revenge, he needed it. Something shifted in Rogan's expression, surprise, relief, something darker and more possessive. You're braver than you know, or stupider, he laughed. And this time it was genuine. Maybe both. He picked up his drink again, the moment of vulnerability passing. Ozzy's probably awake by now. You should go to him. Juniper nodded and turned to leave, but paused at the door. Rogan? Yes, that man Anthony. If he really did have a sick daughter, would you have helped? Rogan was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he finally admitted. I would have. Because that's what family does. And in my world, everyone who works for me is family. Which is why betrayal is unforgivable. Juniper left the study with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Rogan Steele was exactly as dangerous as everyone said. And somehow she was falling for him anyway. It happened 3 nights later, after Ozzy had finally fallen asleep following another nightmare. Juniper sat in the chair beside his race car bed, watching his small chest rise and fall, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. The nightmares were less frequent now, once or twice a week instead of every night, but when they came, they were brutal. Tonight he'd woken up screaming for his mother, his whole body shaking with sobs that broke something inside Juniper's chest. She'd held him through it, teaching him the breathing exercises, singing the lullabies her own mother had taught her, reminding him that he was safe and loved and not alone. Eventually, exhaustion had claimed him, and he'd fallen back asleep with his small hand clutching her wrist like she might disappear if he let go. "You're good with him." Rogan's voice came from the doorway, low and unexpected. He had no idea the night would end in blood. Juniper turned to find him watching them, still in his work clothes but with his jacket discarded and his sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, not the physical exhaustion of a long day, but the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been carrying impossible weight for too long. He just needed someone, Juniper whispered, not wanting to wake Ozzy. Someone who wouldn't leave. Like his mother did, Rogan moved into the room with careful silence, stopping on the other side of Ozzy's bed. Not that she wanted to leave. Cancer didn't give her a choice. "Elena told me a little," Juniper said carefully. "That it was fast, that he didn't get to say goodbye. 6 months from diagnosis to death." Rogan's hand hovered over Ozzy's dark curls but didn't quite touch, as if he was afraid his son might break. She was 32 years old, brilliant, fierce, everything I wasn't. And she loved him so completely that watching her slip away, watching her fight and lose, he stopped, his jaw tightening. Juniper had never heard him talk about Ozzy's mother. In 3 weeks of living here, the subject had been carefully avoided, a wound too raw to examine. But standing in the dim light of their son's room, Rogan's careful control was cracking. He stopped talking after she died. Rogan continued quietly. Just shut down. The therapist said it was his way of processing grief, that he needed time. But time didn't help. Every day he got quieter, smaller, more unreachable. I tried everything. Different doctors, different approaches. Changing his school, changing our routine. Nothing worked. His dark eyes found Juniper's across the bed. And then you showed up in that alley and saved him from those boys. And suddenly he wouldn't stop talking. About you. About how you weren't afraid. About how you made him feel safe. "Rogan, let me finish." His voice was rough now, stripped of its usual control. "That first night, after I brought him home, he talked for hours. About the breathing exercises you taught him. About how you sat with him in the rain like you had nowhere better to be. About how you didn't treat him like he was broken." Rogan's hand finally touched Ozzy's hair, the gesture achingly gentle. "I realized then that I'd been trying to fix him alone. I'd been so focused on being strong enough for both of us that I didn't see what he actually needed. Someone who wasn't drowning in their own grief. Someone who could just be present without the weight of everything we'd lost." Her next words hit him harder than any bullet. Juniper felt her throat tighten. "You're a good father." "I'm a terrified father," Rogan corrected. "Every day I wake up afraid that something will happen to him. That I'll lose him the way I lost her. That my enemies will figure out he's my weakness and use it against me." He looked at her again, and the vulnerability in his expression made her breath catch. "And then you, who have every reason to stay far away from my world, you walked into danger without hesitation. You protected him, and now he's healing because of you. He's healing because he's ready to heal," Juniper said softly. "I'm just here to help. You're more than that." Rogan moved around the bed, and suddenly he was standing in front of her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion and fear and desperate need written across his face. "You're the reason this house feels like a home instead of a museum. You're the reason my son smiles again. You're the reason I come home at night instead of burying myself in work until I'm too numb to feel anything. Rogan, I'm terrified of losing you," he said, the words raw and honest. "I know I don't have the right to feel that way. I know you're here for Ozzy, not for me. But every morning I wake up afraid you'll realize this life isn't worth it. That the danger and the violence and the moral compromises are too much. That you'll leave, and I'll have to watch my son break all over again." Juniper stood, bringing them face to face. "I'm not leaving." "You say that now?" "I'm not leaving," she repeated more forcefully this time. She reached up and cupped his face, making him look at her. "I've spent my entire life being invisible, being told I don't matter, being reminded that people like me, poor, desperate, disposable, don't get to choose better lives. And then you saw me. You didn't just save me from Todd or give me money or fix my problems. You saw me, Rogan. You saw someone worth protecting, someone worth keeping, someone essential." "You are," he said fiercely. "Then trust that I know what I'm choosing." Juniper's thumb brushed his cheekbone. "I see you too. I see the monster you think you are. I see the violence and the danger. But I also see the father who would burn the world down to keep his son safe. I see the man who bought an entire facility just to fire one abusive manager. I see someone who's been alone for too long and doesn't know how to ask for help. For once, he wasn't thinking like a boss, but like a man about to lose everything. Rogan's hands came up to cover hers, holding her touch against his face like it was something precious. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to need someone. How to be vulnerable. How to let someone close without it being a weapon my enemies can use. Then we figure it out together, Juniper said. You teach me your world, and I'll teach you how to trust that I won't run from it. For a long moment, they just stood there in the dim light of Ozzy's room, their son sleeping peacefully between them, the weight of everything unspoken, hanging heavy in the air. Then Rogan leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers, his breath shaky. I'm falling for you, he whispered. And it terrifies me more than anything else in my entire life. Good, Juniper whispered back, because I'm falling for you too, and that terrifies me just as much. He kissed her, then gentle and desperate and full of all the fear and need and impossible hope that neither of them knew how to voice. Juniper kissed him back, her hands tangling in his hair, her heart hammering against her ribs with the knowledge that this was crossing a line they couldn't uncross. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rogan rested his forehead against hers again. This complicates everything. I know. My enemies will come after you. They'll see you as a weakness. Let them try. He laughed, soft and surprised. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most reckless. Maybe both. Juniper stepped back, creating distance before they did something that would wake Ozzy. Go to bed, Rogan. Get some rest. Tomorrow we can figure out what this means. Tomorrow, he agreed. But he paused at the door, looking back at her with something like wonder. Thank you. For staying. For choosing us. Thank you for giving me something worth choosing. But this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. After he left, Juniper sank back into the chair beside Ozzy's bed, her fingers pressed against her still tingling lips. She'd just kissed her employer, the most dangerous man in the city, a man who operated in moral gray areas and made people disappear when they crossed him, and she wanted to do it again. Ozzy stirred in his sleep, his hand reaching out until it found her wrist again. She took his small hand in hers and held on, anchoring them both. Whatever came next, whatever dangers or complications or impossible choices, she'd meant what she said. She wasn't leaving. Not this house, not this boy, and not the terrifying, complicated man who'd somehow become essential to her survival. For the first time in her life, Juniper Reed was choosing to be visible. And it felt like the beginning of everything. The invitation, if it could be called that, came 3 days later. Rogan found her in the garden where she and Ozzy were building an elaborate fort out of fallen branches. He stood at the edge of their construction zone, perfectly dressed as always, watching them work with that same intensity that made Juniper's pulse quicken. There's a charity gala tonight, he said without preamble. Art auction for the children's hospital. I need you to come with me. Ozzy looked up from the stick he was arranging. Is Juniper going on a date with you? Papa? It's work, Rogan said, but his eyes were on Juniper. I need a partner who can handle themselves in that environment. Someone who won't be intimidated by the kind of people who attend these events. Someone who calls you on your bullshit? Juniper translated, earning a surprised laugh from Ozzy, who immediately covered his mouth because he wasn't supposed to repeat that word, and a slight smile from Rogan. Exactly that, Rogan confirmed. Elena has a dress for you. Car leaves at 7. He walked away before she could argue, which was probably strategic. Juniper looked at Ozzy, who was grinning like he'd just witnessed something monumentally important. Papa never takes anyone to his work parties, Ozzy said. Not since Mama died. This is a big deal. It's just work, Juniper said, but her heart was hammering. Uh-huh, Ozzy's grin widened. That's why your face is all red. Finish the fort, Juniper ordered, tossing a stick at him. He thought it was over until he noticed something strange. By 7 o'clock, Juniper understood why Elena had been smiling knowingly all afternoon. The dress wasn't just expensive, it was a statement. Deep emerald silk that hugged her curves and flowed to the floor, with a neckline that was elegant without being inappropriate. Elena had also provided jewelry, shoes, and a stylist who'd transformed Juniper's usually simple appearance into something that belonged at the kind of event where tickets cost more than her old monthly salary. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. You look like a princess, Ozzy declared from her doorway, where he stood in his pajamas with his stuffed lion. I look terrified, Juniper corrected. Papa's going to think you're beautiful, Ozzy said, with the confident wisdom of an 8-year-old. He already does, but but now he's going to be all. He made an exaggerated, surprised face that made Juniper laugh despite her nerves. Go to bed, troublemaker. Elena's making you dinner. Can I stay up until you get back? Absolutely not. Ozzy hugged her quickly, careful not to wrinkle the dress, and ran off down the hall. Juniper took a deep breath, checked her reflection one more time, and headed downstairs where Rogan was waiting. He stood in the foyer looking at his phone, and when he glanced up and saw her on the stairs, he went completely still. His expression shifted through several emotions too quickly to catalog, landing on something that looked like reverence mixed with possession. You look, he stopped, seeming to have trouble finding words. Juniper. Is that good or bad? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. It's dangerous. He moved to meet her at the bottom of the stairs, offering his arm with the kind of old-fashioned courtesy that felt natural on him. Every man in that room is going to want you, and I'm going to have to pretend I'm civilized enough not to break their hands for looking. Possessive much? You have no idea. His hand settled on her lower back as he guided her to the waiting car, and the heat of his palm through the silk made her skin tingle. Tonight is going to test my control in ways I'm not prepared for. What followed next was completely unexpected. The gala was held in a hotel ballroom that looked like something from another era: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, artwork worth more than small countries. Juniper had never been anywhere like this. She'd served people like this, cleaned up after them, been invisible to them, but walking in on Rogan's arm, wearing a dress that probably cost more than her old car, she felt their attention like a physical weight. Rogan introduced her as his personal assistant, which was technically true but felt insufficient for whatever they were becoming. People responded to her presence with varying degrees of surprise and curiosity. Clearly, Rogan Steele bringing a date was newsworthy. Try not to punch anyone, Rogan murmured as they approached a cluster of well-dressed couples. I make no promises. The evening was exhausting in ways Juniper hadn't anticipated. She met politicians who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes, business owners who assessed her like she was a commodity, society wives who looked down their noses at the woman who'd clearly come from nowhere. And through it all, Rogan kept her close, his hand never leaving her back, his presence a constant reminder that she wasn't alone in this world of casual cruelty and veiled insults. But it was during dinner, seated at a table with a real estate developer and his wife, that things got interesting. So, Miss Reed, the developer said, his smile condescending. How long have you been working for Mr. Steele? About a month, Juniper replied. And before that? I was a janitor. The silence that followed was deafening. The developer's wife actually choked on her wine. Several other people at the table exchanged glances that ranged from amused to scandalized. But Rogan just smiled, sharp and dangerous. Juniper saved my son's life, he said calmly. She confronted 3 teenage boys who were hurting him, drove them off, and stayed with him until I arrived. She did that despite being exhausted from a 12-hour shift, despite having every reason to walk away and mind her own business, despite knowing it could be dangerous. His hand found Juniper's under the table, lacing their fingers together. So yes, she was a janitor, and now she's the person I trust most in the world. Any other questions? The developer had the good sense to look chagrined. No, sir, but his wife, drunk on expensive wine and social superiority, wasn't done. It's just surprising, that's all. A man of your stature with someone so .com on. He didn't realize this moment would come back to haunt him. Juniper felt Rogan tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand and spoke before he could. You're right, I am common. I've scrubbed toilets and floors. I've lived paycheck to paycheck. I've been screamed at by men who thought their money made them important. And you know what I learned from all of that? She leaned forward, her voice steady and clear. I learned that character has nothing to do with bank accounts. That courage isn't about being comfortable, it's about doing the right thing when it costs you something. And that the people who look down on others for their jobs are usually the ones who've never had to actually work for anything. The woman's face went red. How dare you? She dares because she's earned the right to dare. Rogan interrupted, his voice cold enough to frost glass. And she's right. Character doesn't come from money or status, or who your family is. It comes from choices. And Juniper has made better choices in 1 month than you've made in your entire privileged life. He stood, pulling Juniper with him. We're leaving. The company here is insufferable. They left the table and eventually the gala with every pair of eyes in the room following them. Rogan's hand was tight around hers, his jaw set with barely controlled rage. But when they reached the car and the door closed behind them, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with enough force to make her head spin. I wanted to destroy her, he said against her lips. For insulting you. For making you feel like you don't belong in that room. I don't belong in that room, Juniper said honestly. But I don't want to. Those people are miserable. They have everything and they're still empty. And what do you have? Juniper pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I have a home. A child who needs me. A man who's terrifying and complicated and makes me want things I shouldn't want. She cupped his face. I have enough. Rogan kissed her again, slower this time, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. You're too good for me, probably. And you're still here. Unfortunately for both of us, yes. He laughed, and Juniper felt something settle in her chest. This was real. This impossible, dangerous, complicated thing between them was real. Take me home, she said quietly. Our home, Rogan corrected. Our home, Juniper agreed. And for the first time since this insane journey began, it felt like the truth. The threat came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 6 weeks after Juniper had moved into the Steel Mansion. She was in the garden with Ozzy, teaching him how to identify different plants, when Marcus appeared with an expression that made her blood run cold. Miss Reed, he said, his voice professionally calm but his body language screaming danger. I need you and Ozzy to come inside, now. What's wrong? Juniper stood, instinctively moving between Marcus and Ozzy. Mr. Steele's orders, please don't argue. Something didn't add up, and the truth was darker than he expected. They were ushered inside and taken directly to Rogan's office, where he stood behind his desk with a tablet in his hand and murder in his eyes. The moment he saw them, some of the tension left his shoulders, but the rage remained. Papa? Ozzy's voice was small, scared. He'd learned to read his father's moods, and this one was terrifying. Rogan came around the desk and lifted Ozzy into his arms, holding him close. You're safe, both of you, I promise. Then he looked at Marcus. Take Ozzy to Elena, full lockdown protocol. No, Ozzy clung to Rogan's neck. I want to stay with you and Juniper. Not right now, buddy. Rogan's voice was gentle despite the fury written across his face. I need to talk to Juniper alone. Elena will make you hot chocolate. Okay? With extra marshmallows. Ozzy looked at Juniper, seeking reassurance. She forced a smile despite the fear clawing at her throat. I'll come find you in a little bit, sweetheart. I promise. After Marcus carried a reluctant Ozzy from the room, Rogan handed Juniper the tablet. On the screen was a photograph grainy surveillance footage from what looked like the industrial district. 3 teenage boys standing in an alley. The same 3 boys she'd confronted 6 weeks ago. They found you, Rogan said flatly. Or more accurately, they found out who you are. Who you're living with. Juniper's stomach dropped. How? Social media, mostly. Someone at the gala took photos of us together and posted them. Tagged you. Within 24 hours, those boys, Marcus Chen, Derek Walsh, and Justin Carlisle, figured out that the woman who threatened them is now living with me. Rogan took the tablet back, his jaw tight, and they've decided to use that information. Use it how? Hidden in the files was a secret that could destroy them all. Rogan pulled up another image, a text message thread. Juniper read the first few lines and felt sick. That's her. The janitor who threatened us. She's living with Rogan Steele now. That Mafia guy. So what? We can't touch her. We don't have to touch her. We just have to make Steele think someone's coming for her, make him paranoid, then leak to the cops that he's getting violent over some random woman, get him investigated. My dad knows people in the DA's office. This could actually work. Juniper looked up at Rogan, her heart hammering. They're trying to use me against you. They're trying to destabilize me, Rogan corrected. Create enough chaos that my business gets investigated. My competitors see weakness. My people start questioning my judgment. His hand clenched around the tablet. They're using you as bait to destroy everything I've built. So what do we do? We? Rogan's expression was unreadable. There is no we in this decision, Juniper. This is my world, my problem, my solution. They're targeting me, Juniper argued. That makes it my problem too. And if I handle this the way I want to handle it, you're going to see exactly what kind of monster I can be. Rogan moved closer, and the cold fury in his eyes made her breath catch. These boys threatened my son. Now they're threatening you, and I'm going to make an example of them that ensures no one ever makes that mistake again. Rogan, I'm going to destroy them, he said quietly. Not physically. I won't hurt them. But their futures, their reputations, their families' businesses, all of it ends today. And you're going to watch me do it. Because you need to understand what being with me actually means. What she found in the envelope froze her in place. Juniper should have been horrified, should have argued for mercy or restraint. But standing in front of this man who'd given her everything, who'd made her son laugh again, who'd chosen her despite every logical reason not to. She found she didn't want to argue. "Show me," she said. Over the next 4 hours, Juniper witnessed Rogan Steele dismantle 3 teenage boys' entire lives with surgical precision. Marcus Chen's father owned a construction company that relied on contracts from Steel Industries. Those contracts were terminated immediately, with word spreading through the industry that Chen Construction was unreliable. Derek Walsh's mother was a lawyer hoping to make partner at a firm that handled Rogan's legal work. A single phone call ensured that partnership would never happen. Justin Carlisle's family ran a chain of restaurants. Health inspections were suddenly scheduled, permits were mysteriously delayed, and suppliers began refusing to work with them. And through it all, Rogan made sure the boys knew exactly why this was happening. He had them brought to his office, not roughly, not violently, but with enough show of force that they arrived terrified and laid out exactly what their attempt to use Juniper had cost them. "You thought threatening someone I care about would make me weak," Rogan said, his voice deadly calm. "You thought I'd be so desperate to protect her that I'd make mistakes. But what you didn't understand is that protecting the people I love doesn't make me weak. It makes me absolutely ruthless." His right-hand man had been hiding something from him. Marcus Chen was crying. Derek Walsh looked like he might vomit. Justin Carlisle, the ringleader, was pale and shaking. "Please," Justin begged. "We didn't mean we were just angry about what she did." "What she did?" Rogan's voice dropped to something dangerous. "She stopped you from torturing my son. She protected a terrified child. And your response was to try to destroy her life." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to college, different colleges, in different states, far from here. Your parents are going to pay for it out of what's left of their savings after I'm done dismantling their businesses. And you're never going to come back to this city. Because if I see any of you again, if I even hear your names in connection with anyone I care about, I won't be this merciful." "This is merciful?" Derek's voice cracked. "You're alive," Rogan said flatly. "That's more than you deserve." After the boys were escorted out, Marcus still crying, the others too shocked to speak, Rogan turned to Juniper. She'd watched the entire thing from a chair in the corner, silent and still, processing what she'd just witnessed. "Say something," Rogan said quietly. "I should feel guilty," Juniper said slowly. "I should feel bad that 3 kids just had their lives destroyed, that their families are suffering because of me, but you don't." "No," she stood and crossed to him. "I don't, because they hurt Ozzy, because they tried to use me to hurt you, and because..." She stopped, searching for the right words. "Because I finally understand what you meant about family, about how far you'll go to protect the people you love." He trusted her, and that was his biggest mistake. Rogan pulled her into his arms, and she felt some of the tension leave his body. "I terrified you." "Yes, but you're still here." "Yes." Juniper pulled back to look at him. "I'm still here, because this is what choosing you means. Accepting that you'll do terrible things for good reasons, that you'll destroy people who threaten us, that you're exactly as dangerous as everyone says. And you can live with that?" Juniper thought about her old life, invisible, powerless, constantly afraid, and she thought about now, seen, protected, essential. "I can live with it," she said, "because the alternative is going back to being alone. And I'm done being alone." Rogan kissed her then, hard and desperate and full of relief. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you. I should have said it before, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd leave. Afraid I'd lose another person I couldn't survive without." "I love you too," Juniper whispered. "Even though you're terrifying. Even though your world is dangerous. Even though every logical part of my brain is screaming that this is insane." "It is insane." "Good," she smiled. "I've been playing it safe my whole life. Maybe it's time to be a little insane." This was only the beginning of a much bigger war. They stood there in his office, wrapped in each other, while outside the sun set over a city that would soon be buzzing with gossip about Rogan Steele's newest display of power. But Juniper didn't care about gossip or reputation or what anyone else thought. She cared about the man holding her like she was something precious. The boy down the hall who called her name in his sleep. The home they'd built from impossible circumstances and dangerous choices. And she'd defend all of it with the same fierce protectiveness that Rogan had just demonstrated. Because that's what family did. That night, after Ozzy had been read 3 stories and tucked into bed with promises that the bad men were gone and would never come back, Juniper stood in her suite and stared at the door that connected to Rogan's room. It had been there since she'd moved in, locked, unopened, a boundary neither of them had been ready to cross. Until now, she knocked softly. "Rogan? Come in." His suite was larger than hers, decorated in dark woods and leather, masculine and sophisticated. He stood by the window overlooking the gardens, still in his dress shirt and slacks from the day, though he'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves. He looked exhausted and relieved, and something else vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. "Ozzy okay?" he asked. "He's fine. He thinks you're a superhero who defeated the bad guys." Juniper moved closer. "He's not wrong. I'm not a hero, Juniper." "No," she agreed. "You're something more complicated than that. You're the monster who protects his family, and I think I'm okay with that." Under the floorboard, he discovered a truth he wasn't ready for. Rogan turned to face her fully, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "I need you to understand something. What I did today, what I'll do to anyone who threatens you or Ozzy, that's not going to change. I can't be softer or gentler or more merciful. This is who I am. I know. And you're still here." He said it like he couldn't quite believe it. "I'm still here." Juniper closed the distance between them. "Because today I realized something. You didn't just save me from Todd or give me a job or provide safety. You gave me a family. You gave me purpose. You gave me a home where I'm not invisible or disposable or constantly afraid." Her hand came up to his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her palm. "And I will protect that family just as fiercely as you do." "Juniper." "I'm not finished." She looked up at him, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to choke her. "I love you, Rogan Steele. I love your son. I love this life we're building despite how impossible it seems. And I'm choosing to stay. Not because I'm trapped or because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I want to be. This is my family now." Rogan's hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I don't deserve you. Probably not. But I'm keeping you anyway." "Good." She smiled through the tears. "Because I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her then, not the desperate, passionate kisses they'd shared before, but something slower, deeper, more permanent. A promise sealed with touch and breath and the kind of certainty that came from choosing each other despite every reason not to. When they finally broke apart, Rogan pressed his forehead to hers. "Marry me." Juniper's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. "Not because it's practical or because it makes you safer, though it does both those things, but because I want you as my partner in every way. I want Ozzy to know you're permanent. I want the world to know you're mine and I'm yours." His voice dropped to something raw and honest. "I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life knowing you chose me." What she said next shattered his trust instantly. "That's not a question," Juniper pointed out, her heart hammering. "No." A slight smile crossed his face. "It's not. I told you I don't ask permission. You're supposed to ask when it comes to marriage." "Fine." Rogan pulled back and to her complete shock dropped to one knee. He produced a ring box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a diamond that probably cost more than her old apartment building. "Juniper Reed, will you marry me? Will you choose this life, this family, this complicated, dangerous, impossible love? Will you be my wife and Ozzy's mother and the person I build the rest of my life around?" Juniper looked down at this powerful, dangerous man kneeling in front of her, offering her everything. 6 weeks ago, she'd been scrubbing floors. Now she was being proposed to by a Mafia boss who'd just destroyed 3 people's lives to protect her. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was absolutely perfect. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it." Rogan slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, because of course he'd had it sized without her knowing, and stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with enough force to make her head spin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to his bed. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I will love you and protect you and choose you every single day for the rest of my life." "I love you too," Juniper whispered. "Even though you're terrifying, even though I'm completely out of my depth, even though this is the craziest thing I've ever done." "Good." Rogan set her down gently on the bed, his eyes dark with promise. Because crazy is the only way this works. He had no idea a bigger force was controlling everything. That night, they crossed the final boundary between them, sealing their choice with touch and whispered promises, and the kind of intimacy that came from truly knowing each other, flaws, dangers, complications, and all. And when Juniper woke the next morning wrapped in Rogan's arms, the sun streaming through the windows, she felt something she'd never felt before in her entire life. She felt home. 6 months later, Juniper stood in the garden where she'd once taught Ozzy about plants, watching her son because that's what he was now, legally and in every way that mattered, chase butterflies through the flower beds. He wore grass stains on his jeans and had dirt under his nails and laughed with the kind of abandon that came from feeling completely, utterly safe. "He's getting taller," Rogan said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Elena says we need to buy him new clothes again. That's the third time this year." Juniper leaned back against her husband, a word that still made her heart skip, and watched Ozzy successfully catch a butterfly, examine it carefully, and release it back into the air. "He's growing up. He's healing." Rogan pressed a kiss to her temple. "Because of you. Because of us," Juniper corrected. She turned in his arms to face him. "You've changed too, you know. You smile more. You come home earlier. Last week you actually canceled a meeting to help Ozzy with his science project." "The volcano was important," Rogan said seriously, but his eyes were warm. "And Marcus could handle the meeting." Juniper laughed and stretched up to kiss him. 6 months of marriage had made them comfortable with each other in ways that still surprised her. The casual touches, the easy affection, the way they moved around each other like they'd been doing this for decades instead of months. "Juniper, Papa!" Ozzy came running over, his face flushed with excitement. "Can we build a fort? A big one, with the branches from the old oak tree?" "It's almost dinner," Juniper started, but Rogan cut her off. "Dinner can wait. Let's build a fort." He didn't know anything, but he was about to learn everything. Ozzy's face lit up like someone had given him the world, and he grabbed both their hands, pulling them toward the tree line. Juniper caught Rogan's eye over their son's head, and the look they shared was full of understanding this was what mattered. Not the business meetings or the social obligations or the constant vigilance that came with Rogan's world. This, family, laughter, grass-stained jeans and butterfly hunts and fort building in the fading afternoon light. They spent the next hour constructing an elaborate fort that was probably structurally unsound but felt like a castle to Ozzy. He directed them with the confidence of a general commanding troops, and both Rogan and Juniper obeyed with exaggerated seriousness that made him giggle. When the fort was finished, they sat inside it cramped and slightly uncomfortable but together, and Ozzy leaned against Juniper with Rogan's arm around both of them. "This is my favorite place," Ozzy said quietly. "Here, with you." "Mine too," Juniper said, her throat tight with emotion. "Mine 3, Rogan added, pulling them both closer. Later, after Ozzy had been fed and bathed and read his stories and tucked into bed with promises that they'd defend the fort against invaders tomorrow, Juniper stood in the hallway outside his room and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd found here. 6 months ago, she'd been a janitor, invisible, desperate, surviving day by day with no real hope for anything better. Now she was Juniper Steele, wife to a man who'd burned down her old life to give her a new one. Mother to a boy who called her name in his sleep, not from nightmares, but to make sure she was still there. "What are you thinking about?" Rogan asked, appearing beside her in the way he had, silent and sudden and always exactly when she needed him. "That I found my family in the strangest way possible," Juniper said. "In an alley, in a moment of impulse, in choosing to help when every instinct told me to walk away. Best impulse decision you ever made," Rogan said. "Second best," Juniper corrected, taking his hand. "The best was saying yes when you proposed. I didn't really give you a choice." "You gave me every choice." She turned to face him. "You could have forced me to stay. You could have used money or power or threats. But you didn't. You asked. And every day since. You've proven that choosing you was the right decision." But what he discovered next changed everything. Rogan pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I never thought I'd have this again. After losing Ozzy's mother, I thought family was over for me. That I'd raise him alone and that would be enough." His voice was rough with emotion. "And then you showed up in that alley and saved my son, and somehow saved me too. We saved each other," Juniper said. "You pulled me out of a life where I was invisible. I pulled you out of grief that was consuming you. And together we gave Ozzy a family that's whole again." They stood in the hallway, wrapped in each other, listening to the sounds of their home, Elena humming in the kitchen, Marcus doing evening rounds, Ozzy's soft breathing from behind his door. It wasn't a perfect family. It was built from tragedy and impossible circumstances and moral compromises that Juniper still struggled with sometimes. But it was theirs, chosen and fought for and fiercely protected. "I love you," Rogan said, "more than I thought possible. More than is probably healthy or sane or safe." "I love you too," Juniper replied. "Even though you're terrifying, even though your world is dangerous, even though marrying you was probably the craziest thing I've ever done. No regrets?" Juniper thought about her old life, the studio apartment, the abusive boss, the constant fear of one emergency, destroying everything. And she thought about now waking up in Rogan's arms, watching Ozzy grow, being essential instead of invisible. Not a single one, she said. Rogan kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. When they broke apart, he took her hand and led her toward their suite, not his or hers anymore, but theirs. The way everything in this house had become shared. "Come to bed, Mrs. Steele," he said. "In a minute." Juniper pulled away and walked back to Ozzy's door, opening it just a crack to check on him one more time. He slept peacefully, his stuffed lion clutched to his chest, his face relaxed in a way that still sometimes surprised her after those early weeks of nightmares. On his nightstand, carefully framed, was the drawing he'd made that first week, 3 figures holding hands. A tall man, a small boy, and a woman with dark hair and a blue jacket. Their family, immortalized in crayon. He didn't realize this moment would come back to haunt him. Juniper closed the door softly and returned to Rogan, taking his hand. "Okay, now I'm ready." They walked to their suite together, and Juniper thought about how far she'd come from that alley, from that moment of impulse that had changed everything. She'd been trying to save a scared child, and somehow she'd saved herself in the process. She'd found her home, her family, her purpose. And it was imperfect and complicated, and built from tragedy and choice and impossible circumstances. But it was theirs, chosen and real and absolutely worth every risk. And that, Juniper thought as Rogan pulled her close and the night wrapped around them like a promise, was everything she'd ever needed. 1 year later, Juniper stood in Rogan's office, their office now, since she'd officially become his business partner, reviewing contracts when Marcus entered with an expression she'd learned to read over the past 18 months. "There's someone here to see you," he said. "A young woman. Says she needs help." Juniper set down the papers and looked at Rogan, who was watching her with that same intensity that still made her breath catch. "Another one? 7th this month," he confirmed. "Word's spreading. The streets are talking. Don't just watch the crime become a part of the family. In the year since their wedding, something unexpected had happened. Women, invisible women, desperate women, women working dead-end jobs for abusive bosses, had started finding their way to the Steele mansion. Some came looking for jobs. Some came looking for protection. Some came because they'd heard about the janitor who'd saved a Mafia boss's son and somehow ended up with everything she'd ever wanted. Juniper had started helping them, one by one, finding them better jobs, better situations, better lives. Rogan had supported every decision, seeing in each woman the same spark he'd seen in Juniper that rainy night in the alley. "Send her in," Juniper said. The woman who entered was maybe 25, wearing a fast food uniform and carrying the same exhaustion Juniper remembered from her own reflection. She had a black eye that someone had tried to cover with makeup, and her hands shook as she clutched her purse. "Mrs. Steele?" she said quietly. "My name is Sarah. I work at a restaurant downtown, and my manager, her voice broke. I heard you help women like me, women who need a way out." Juniper stood and walked around the desk, her heart aching with recognition. "You heard right," she said gently. "Tell me everything." As Sarah began her story, the harassment, the stolen wages, the threats, Juniper caught Rogan's eye. He nodded once, and she knew he understood. This was what they did now. This was their legacy. They protected the invisible. They gave voice to the desperate. They built family from broken pieces and impossible circumstances. And somewhere in the city, in alleys and kitchens and parking lots, women who'd been told they didn't matter were learning that they did, that someone saw them. That help sometimes came from the most unexpected places. Juniper took Sarah's shaking hand in hers. "You're safe now," she said. "We're going to fix this, together." And as Sarah's tears of relief fell, Juniper thought about the janitor she'd been, the woman she'd become, and the family she'd found in the rain-soaked darkness of a dangerous alley. It had all started with one impulsive moment of courage, and it had changed everything. If this story touched your heart, please share in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that help sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Your support keeps these stories alive.